Liga MX is the most watched soccer league in the US, pay the best salaries in the region, and more or less dominate the North American soccer landscape. But MLS has made huge gains to close the gap in quality, have a significantly more attractive marketplace, and the level of financial stability that Mexican clubs can only dream about. So what if MLS and Liga MX were to merge into a North American Super League? That's the conversation. Welcome into a brand new beIN the Conversation. I'm Andres Cordero, joined on the show by Eric Krakauer. And I really like this subject today because it's one that is sort of above my pay grade, but fascinating in terms of potentially creating a juggernaut that could compete with the likes of European football and South American soccer. The question, of course, is should Major League Soccer and Liga MX merge to combine into a North American Super League? And we'll go part by part on this argument, Eric. The question I think we should begin with is why would either side want to do this? And so why would Major League Soccer want to merge with Liga MX?
I think that the number one reason is viewership. I don't think it's a secret that Liga MX gets the highest numbers out of any soccer competition in this country. And it is a significant difference between those who watch Liga MX and any other league in this country, including the Premier League and La Liga. And we all know that the more eyes you have on your product, the more revenue you have. And, it's also no secret that MLS has had a little bit of a struggle selling itself to a broader audience. So that, for me, is the thing that MLS sees as the most attractive about a potential merger.
So I think you're right to point out the TV viewership as like reason number one in big, bold letters and highlighter yellow, because we've seen how desperate leagues and the sort of organizing bodies were in this sort of pandemic world to get football back in some capacity just to stop the bleeding financially. And it wasn't about, fans in the stands. It wasn't about selling jerseys, which are sort of things that are typically brought up when you talk about, revenue, ticket sales and jersey sales and whatnot. But predominantly it's a market driven by TV revenue, right? It's one of the reasons why the disparity is so big in La Liga, for example, between what Barcelona and Real Madrid bring in what everybody else does. And so I think that TV revenue has to be the most attractive area for Major League Soccer. And so I think MLS would benefit tremendously from sort of attaching itself to brands. I hate to talk about football in this way, but it's sort of the subject, to brands like America, like Chivas, these big established clubs with a lot of tradition, a lot of history, and a huge fan base that goes generation by generation. It's true that in MLS now, at 25 years old, you have kids that have grown up with the game and the game's always been there for them, but you don't have that generational thing where there's a ton of people whose grandfather took their father, who then took their son to Major League Soccer. I think that culture is sort of still being developed, whereas it already exists in Liga MX, and it makes for tremendous atmospheres at the stadium when fans are allowed into the stadium, and it makes for a really good TV product as well. And that's probably reason number one why MLS would be interested, is to capture that TV audience that Liga MX enjoys today.
Yeah, and I'll add something else. It would also grab the attention of the ancillary media that is out there. Just take, for example, what has happened in Orlando with the bubble, the MLS is back bubble. If you look at any other broadcaster that has nothing to do, that is completely separate from soccer, hardly a word has been uttered about the MLS bubble. We've heard a lot about the NBA playing in Orlando and how they're taking every precaution in order to avoid COVID infections. And yet very little has been said about MLS anywhere. It's NBA. There's a lot of talk about Major League Baseball and the NFL as well. And I think that if you associate yourself or connect yourself with Liga MX, it would make it very difficult for other broadcasters or other media channels to ignore the soccer product here in the country. Because right now, even though MLS has been growing steadily, I don't think it's grown significantly to really turn anybody else's neck who isn't already invested in the game.
Yeah, and I would say that beyond just the TV revenue, right, and which I think we agree that it would be a ratings monster because it would become instantly the number one watched soccer league in the U.S., which Liga MX already is. And again, Major League Soccer is not really even close to. But there's another angle to why MLS would want to sort of attach itself to Liga MX. And I think that's the quality, the level of play. And yes, MLS has made huge strides. And part of that is targeted allocation money that allowed them to bring in, bigger name players or better players who demanded better salaries without having to expand the designated player rule, which only allows for 3 players to be making those sort of like 7-figure salaries. But I think when you look at Liga MX as the league that pays the highest median salary in the region, that can attract players who are, playing in Europe in a way that MLS is only just now starting to. It doesn't have to be players toward the end of their career. I think of guys like Andre Pierre-Gignac, who surprised everyone when he went to Liga MX. I think the quality of play of this combined league would be better than what we see currently in Liga MX or in MLS.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the ways that you would get to a better product would be the crisscrossing of players from one league to another, right? So there wouldn't be the dispute of talent, or talent would be disputed not between leagues, which is what we're seeing now as MLS grows in significance. We're seeing a lot of South American players, for example, to use another continent, that instead of just looking at Liga MX as an option or as a springboard to go to Europe, they're looking at MLS as well, Miguel Almiron. In this situation, the battle would be between clubs, and ultimately individual clubs would benefit because of that, and the quality would improve. And it's worth noting that lack of quality, which I think is very harsh, considering especially how much the league has improved, has been one of the knocks on MLS over the last few years, especially when they're competing with better products in Liga MX, as well as what's coming out of Europe.
Ultimately, I think we have a landscape of American soccer, or soccer in America, where you can watch Ligue 1, La Liga, the Bundesliga, the Premier League. You can watch basically any football you want on the planet here, and that competition is fierce. I think that merger would clearly benefit MLS, and in some ways better than it would benefit Liga MX. So then the natural second follow-up question is, why would Liga MX want to merge with Major League Soccer?
Well, the business model is a really good one, isn't it? We've seen that recently. Liga MX has suspended promotion and relegation, and the main reason behind it is basically the questions that have arisen about the financial stability of clubs in the second division in Mexico. Now, I'm not going to go into it, but there's a long history of finances only really benefiting, or decisions within the Mexican FA or the league, rather, benefiting the bigger clubs in Mexico. These are privately owned clubs, and the fact that a lot of these teams not only would not be contending with relegation, which is an obvious loss of revenue, but now you are expanding even further into a bigger market. And given that, I guess, the attention that the league would be getting if the two merged, there would be a chance that not only do you expand into the country into already existing soccer supporters, but the idea that you may attract new eyes to the game. But ultimately, I see a lot of the Mexican ownership looking at MLS and thinking, well, that is a financial model that certainly would suit me, because losing money is really not a big option, all right, or it certainly isn't a major risk. And that's why we've seen the president of Atlas and Santos Laguna, his name escapes me right now, but he owns 2 clubs in Liga MX, saying that this merger would be a financial boon for both leagues.
Yeah, I guess I could condense all of that into like a much shorter declaration. That is money, right? It's money. It's the market it's the market stability, for one, that exists in Major League Soccer, which has its pros and cons, because it's been a very sort of closely guarded, centrally commanded model that in some ways has made the league more financially viable, especially as we moved away from an era where one owner owning multiple teams was much more common in Major League Soccer than it was in Mexican football. But ultimately, I think because, as we mentioned regarding the first question, Liga MX is the most watched soccer league in the US. That is a huge market for Liga MX clubs to try and further exploit, to penetrate deeper, which of course they already do, but this would be in a way that would sort of officialize it, bring it a little bit closer. In this case, you are talking about revenue in terms of dollars instead of pesos, right? You're bringing in your ticket sales in dollars, and you have these, for better or worse, they probably have to be relaxed. We'll get into that later. But these sort of financial guardrails that exist in Major League Soccer to sort of protect the league, protect the clubs. That you can argue whether that it goes too far, but at least it's there in a way that hasn't been for Liga MX clubs that do potentially feel much more exposed. You can think of MLS's single entity as something that sort of protects the entirety of the league, whereas the clubs are sort of left to fend for themselves in a sense in Liga MX. And so I think ultimately it's the conditions of the American market, period, not just the American soccer market, but the American market that Liga MX would benefit from the most.
For sure, and that also would attract more investors to these clubs. So you have the ownership, but ownership is always looking for investment from other parties. And if you are in a stable league like MLS or a similar league model, that is certainly going to attract more investors, the same way as we've seen a lot of people pumping money into big clubs in Europe.
And so I guess the follow-up to that would be, what would this look like if you were to merge the two leagues? Because they're so dramatically different in format, in culture, I guess in language, but that's a lesser degree of difficulty to overcome. What would a North American Super League look like?
Well, I think that's one of the biggest questions, and there are a few options. But if you take all the MLS teams, including the future expansion teams like Charlotte, St. Louis, you're talking about 30 MLS teams. And there are already a lot of questions about the schedule going forward with MLS alone. So now you add 18 teams right now, but maybe 20 to balance it out, bringing some teams from the second division up to Liga MX. You're talking about essentially 50 teams. And how do you schedule those fixtures? I mean, that's a heck of a lot of fixtures. One way around it is you would use a model that is used by Major League Baseball, for example, where you split all these teams into divisions. You play most of those games or games against your division rivals, and then every once in a while you have intra-league games that are played as well. The problem with that is that you have a lot of teams that ultimately wouldn't play each other, and many would probably look at that as a problem because maybe the schedule doesn't offer competitive parity. So that's one way I see it. The other thing is you're going to have to expand the hours within which you can play, because there are significant time differences. And one thing will have to happen for sure, Dre, and that is that what is now the Apertura, Liguilla, Clausura, and Liguilla schedule or format in Liga MX would have to change in order to suit something that is more amenable to MLS as well.
Yeah, so we'll talk about some of the things standing in the way of this in a moment, but first let's sort of focus in on how it could work in terms of you've got two leagues that both have playoffs, so that wouldn't be a real contention. Whereas like if you were trying to merge with a league that had like a European format, I think there might be some pushback to how you decide a champion. The Liguilla, the playoffs, very similar in that regard. So I don't think that's something to stand in the way of it. In terms of the number of teams, right? You mentioned MLS is 26 teams now. It'll be 30 teams by 2023. That's Austin coming in next, I believe, makes it 27. Yeah. You got Charlotte after that, makes it 28. And then Sacramento and St. Louis coming in at the same time in 2023 would make it a 30-team league, which, by the way, would be sort of a lot for most leagues, right? I know that Argentina moved to a 30-league Superliga for a while, and then tried to cut that down. But you're 20 teams, some have 18 teams. So even a 30-team league is enormous. Now we're talking about 30 plus at least 18, which is the current number of teams in Liga MX. And there was a report by ESPN Deportes some time ago that said the owners in Liga MX had actually considered or hashed out some of the details of what a merger would look like. And there was a possibility that they would, as you suggest, add two teams from the Segunda or from the Liga Ascenso to make it 20 first division teams that would effectively kill promotion relegation. That's not a huge stumbling block, I don't think, either, because much like the playoff thing, which wouldn't be in the way because both leagues have that, Liga MX have suspended something you brought up off the top, promotion relegation, which I think would be a major stumbling block, if not for the fact that for the next 5 years, there is no promotion relegation in Liga MX. And it becomes a lot easier to say, you know what, forget 4 or 5 years. This is just the way things are now. Once that genie's out of the bottle, it could be very, very difficult to put back in. And so what you need then is a league that will accommodate at the very minimum 48 teams. And for a number of reasons, I like 48 more than I like 50. So I'm not even sure that you need to bring up 2 Liga Ascenso teams. Well, there is a very real question as to what happens to all of those Ascenso second division teams and the rest of the pyramid in Mexico as a result of this merger. But we're looking at a league that would be made up of at least 48 teams. And I think there's only 2 ways, or big picture, 2 ways to do this. So we've talked about some of the things that could allow this to happen, right? The fact that Liga MX have already suspended Pro Rel for at least 5 seasons makes it easier to extend that for good permanently. That both leagues have playoffs. And so in this American model, you could have American league model, you could have these 2 leagues sort of work semi-independently, a little bit of crossover just to make things interesting and to build some sort of interleague rivalries. And then each side has sort of their own playoffs, which both leagues currently do, and the champion of each facing off in a final, whether that's 2 legs or, you know, a one-off in a neutral ground. I think, again, this would be a ratings juggernaut. It would be one of the most important sporting leagues in the United States, and certainly the most watched and most important soccer league in the US. But what I think would be another route that they could go here is a pyramid, a tiered system, even if it's a closed tiered system. And that is, we talked about, 48 to 50 teams being a lot of teams to play in one league. Well, what if you were to break that up into 2 or 3 leagues and have within the same league a promotion relegation system, a League One and a League Two that every year had some interchangeability. The bottom teams relegated the top teams from League Two going into League One. I think there would be some pushback, obviously, from MLS. This is a major topic, and we can do an entire show on its own. We probably will at some point on just Pro Rel. But that could be a feasible way of combining these 48 teams into one footballing structure.
Yeah, you know what? And we'll get to this in a second when we're looking at all the potential obstacles that could stop this merger from happening. And you're talking about one right now. I understand that pragmatically, that pyramid would certainly be a solution. And, is it applicable? Absolutely. But you get a lot of pushback from MLS. And one of the things that I would see in the beginning, actually, Dre, is that there is right now a huge discrepancy in terms of talent between Liga MX and MLS. And where do you see that? You see that in the CONCACAF Champions League. So there's a very real possibility that if that system, or if that format were applied, that the teams that you would see initially in the bottom of those leagues would be MLS teams, while the Liga MX teams would be nearer to the top. So I don't know what that would do for parity in the league, but structurally, it absolutely works.
Yeah, I actually think this is a good way to segue into what could be standing in the way, what could prevent this from happening. Because while I think it would make sense, just sort of logically, to have a closed pyramid system with promotion relegation, I just think there's absolutely no way that MLS owners who have paid tremendous amounts in fees just to have their club play in that league would then be okay with having their team relegated into a second division with no guarantee that you're ever going to be coming back up. That's sort of part of the regular pro rel debate that we've had ad nauseum in bars, soccer bars and soccer pubs across the country for many, many years, and will continue to have. But I think there's other things that could stand in the way of this happening. And so a lot of it has to do with finances, right? Many of the same reasons why they would want to merge are some of the same things that are going to make it very, very difficult to come to a consensus on how the league should operate. And I think MLS's single entity structure is sort of priority number one for Liga MX clubs that are used to having their own sort of decision making. Yeah, autonomy. It's just to put it in its simplest terms, when you sign for an MLS club, you still sign contracts with Major League Soccer as opposed to with the individual club, and they can sort of allocate team players to different teams, something that would be unheard of for a Liga MX. So you combine that single entity structure with the independence that Mexican clubs have. How would you be able to reconcile those two things? And then even more sort of first step predominantly is Liga MX has no salary cap. How are you going to tell clubs now that they can only spend a certain amount where do you even set that amount? And MLS does have a salary cap. It's a pretty restrictive one, despite the emergence of things like target allocation money and the designated player rule. But then where would you be able to set a salary cap that would make Mexican and American and Canadian clubs happy? Or would you have to completely do without a salary cap altogether in hopes that, as you brought up earlier, sort of increased TV revenue will make it a moot point?
Well, I think I don't know about making it a moot point, but it will certainly give the clubs more wiggle room. And I'm not so sure that the owners of Mexican clubs would be too opposed to a salary cap, because essentially Liga MX right now benefits from not having a salary cap, and that's why they attract more talent to their league than MLS does here. But the idea that you wouldn't be competing anymore to attract that talent to your league as opposed to MLS, I think would give the owners some comfort. Okay, we're going to be individual clubs are going to be competing for the best players, and it won't be a battle between the leagues. So that may give some not pause, but it will actually the opposite. Perhaps it will allow those Mexican owners to think, well, maybe there's a way to save money here, right? If we're not paying players astronomical amounts, and we don't have to compete with MLS because we are essentially the same entity. The two biggest things that I see, or biggest obstacles to this merger, number one, scheduling and figuring out a format that all these teams will be happy with. As I noted before, I don't think the pyramid would work because American owners are dead set against promotion relegation, because it could become a revenue hit, right? So you're not going to invest millions of dollars into an institution and then worry that you may lose some of that money. And that's actually why in Europe, we might be seeing the opposite happen, right? Where pro relegation might be a thing of the past, and the European Super League may very well be a thing of the future. And I will say this now, that if that happens, if there is a European Super League, I think the idea of a merger between MLS and Liga MX becomes far, far more realistic. But the other thing is, well, what happens to the other CONCACAF leagues, right? Costa Rica, Honduras, they're already playing third, fourth, fifth fiddle to Liga MX and MLS. I feel like if you had a North American Super League like this, you would essentially leave those leagues to their own devices, and financially, I think that they would just die off. In fact, we're already seeing that to some degree, and CONCACAF has come in and brought up some leagues and some competitions in order to help those leagues financially. And so I think you would undo that. And what do you do with the CONCACAF Champions League? There's no point in playing it, right?
Whatever route they go in terms of some unified format that both Mexican clubs and MLS clubs can agree to, you still need final approval from FIFA and from CONCACAF, yep. Which, in the most cynical way may mean just greasing the right palms. But beyond that, it also means sort of not working actively against the things that, FIFA and CONCACAF have been trying to set up. And the Champions League is one of those things that FIFA might not be ready to do away with. And if you already have the Mexican clubs and the MLS clubs playing in the same league, it really does away with a huge incentive, the biggest straw of the Champions League, which is to see the clubs from the two biggest leagues in the region go head to head. If that's a regular occurrence on a week-to-week basis in the league, it sort of negates the need for a Champions League altogether. Exactly.
And how are the other leagues going to compete? Like, how are the Saprissas of this world going to compete with an Atlas or an LA Galaxy, who are financially just a lot richer than those clubs? The competition would become non-existent. And I think that is a problem. And by the way, there's another league, a burgeoning league in Canada right now that would have a big issue with this as well, the domestic Canadian league. And they already have a problem, and that is that the best Canadian teams don't play in their league. They play for Major League Soccer.
Okay, so let's make some final statements then and try and sort of bring this all together into like one big declarative thing at the end. And I guess I'll start with this, because I do think the biggest impediment to this happening is control. It's the way that Major League Soccer wants to sort of control its clubs and its footballing climate, and the way that Liga MX teams may want to do that. And I think ultimately Major League Soccer may just believe that it doesn't need to merge with Liga MX, that it's on the trajectory to overtake Liga MX at some point with 30 clubs in a variety of markets. If you look at the SoccerX Football Finance 100 is a ranking of the most valuable teams. On that list of the 100 most sort of valuable, bankable teams, there's 17 clubs from Major League Soccer and only 3 from Liga MX. So for all of the tradition and the history and the quality in Liga MX, when it comes to the business side of things, perhaps Major League Soccer is in a much better position. Money talks at the end of the day, and there might not be quite the same incentive for MLS to merge with Liga MX than some, particularly the non-giants in Liga MX might feel toward joining with MLS. And I think that, to me, is the biggest thing to break through, is that I cannot imagine a situation where those in power of Mexican football at the moment relinquish that power, where those in power of Major League Soccer relinquish that power in order to build, as exciting as it would be, as much of a ratings juggernaut as it would be, a sort of unified North American soccer league. I think it's one of those things that in theory sounds incredible and in practice is almost impossible to intertwine.
Yeah, 100%. And I will say this, if you look at both leagues from a financial point of view right now, you look at the MLS model and how right now it's a very safe financial model, and the fact that the league is growing steadily, attracting more talent, and the gap in terms of on-field productivity is actually diminishing between the two leagues. I think that you are Don Garber or anybody involved in MLS, and you think, well, the way things are going right now, it's pretty good, right? TV revenue is an issue. We're not getting the audiences that we want, but the way that the resolution to that problem is that as the league gets better, you're going to attract bigger names to the league. And I think that's one way they think about it. The other thing is, you look at the Campeones Cup, which was recently played between Atlanta United and America, right? Club America. That attracted a lot of attention, right? Because you're talking about the two champions, MLS champion and Liga MX champion. But then you look at the Leagues Cup, which is this invitation tournament between Mexican clubs and MLS clubs, and that was a dud. Apart from the people that you had in the stands, in terms of viewership, not very good. And in terms of just the players that you had on the field, well, there was a lot of rotations because the clubs themselves didn't take the competition too seriously. And I think that's a little bit of a warning to MLS. The idea that if you merge, that perhaps the novelty of MLS teams playing Liga MX teams may wear off a little bit. And there is always the risk that the viewership will not be there. So if you have a Chivas Guadalajara play against Houston Dynamo, you will attract the Houston Dynamo fans and the Chivas Guadalajara. And granted, that's the most supported club in Mexico, but nobody else will watch that game. I mean, I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm just saying that that is a possibility. So I think that financially things are looking good for MLS right now. And by the way, I think that's the only thing the owners care about. And if you need any proof of that, just look at what happened in the very recent collective bargaining agreement, where MLS players and ownership, man, they were locking horns, and it left a very bad taste in the mouths of those players.
So why did we bring this up? Why is this a subject of our second ever beIN the conversation? Well, in 1994, the U.S. hosted the World Cup for the first time in their history. That ushered in a new era of American soccer and gave birth to Major League Soccer. In 2026, the U.S., Mexico, and Canada are going to co-host the World Cup. Maybe that'll be the start of a new era and the birth of a North American soccer league. For now, I'm Andres Cordero. He's Eric Krakauer, and this has been beIN the conversation.